Episode 13 of the Rising Phoenix podcast. I'm your host, Chase Strasser. In today's episode, I'm joined by Matt Krause. Matt is an Elon alum who covered the Phoenix from the sidelines, serving as both a play-by-play and color commentator for various Elon athletic programs across his 4 years and beyond. Matt now serves as the radio voice of the UNC-Chapel Hill women's basketball team. With him, we talk about our shared love of broadcasting Elon athletics, his journey from Elon to Chapel Hill, and where his passion comes from. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. Matt Krause joins me today. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the Rising Phoenix family.
Chase, thanks so much for having me on. I think this is a great product that you guys are working on at Elon, and I think that it's a tremendous way to showcase some of the folks that are connected to Elon Athletics. So I'm grateful for you guys having me on.
Thank you. And let's start with your background. How did you get involved with athletics, and when did playing become a love for broadcasting and for media?
Geez, playing became a love for broadcasting very, very early as in elementary school. I played, t-ball, rec soccer, etc. as a very young child, but quickly, third grader, so decided that I wanted to become a sports broadcaster. I realized it was something that people could get paid to do, and it was, the thing that I wanted to do. With my life at that point. And so by the time I got to high school, I was doing public address announcing for my school's football, basketball, baseball teams. In the early days of what you would now call content creation, filming some videos. I had a blog back in the day, but it was the foundation for what's become my career. And a big part of that career was being able to hone my skills at Elon.
What inspired you to, as a third grader, take on broadcasting? Was it a specific voice out there?
I think it was more so the fact that I, enjoyed watching sports and could talk a lot about the people and the stats and everything that went with it. That was my hobby and interest and passion. And I think there was, family members around me that were like, well, this is a job. It's hard to get into, but it is a job. And so it was built out of that, youth passion for watching games and being in and around fandom more than anything.
Of course, Elon alum. When did you start looking at colleges? When did Elon come into the picture? And was it something about Elon in terms of broadcasting that really appealed to you that brought it to the number one spot?
We'll kind of go in reverse as I answer that question. And the first answer is yes, absolutely. It was all about broadcasting and opportunities. So, like most folks, I started looking at colleges, I don't know, sophomore year of high school, got more serious about it that summer between sophomore and junior year. And that summer, that would have been summer of 2010, I was announcing a public address at the time, but would later transition to internet radio, a college summer wood bat baseball team in my hometown of Alexandria, Virginia. The team's name was the Alexandria Aces. And they had an outfielder on the team that year named David Wood from New Jersey, who went to Elon, actually wound up transitioning to the Elon football team by the time his collegiate career was over. So he went from being an outfielder on the baseball team to a defensive back punt returner on the football team. But anyway, by that point in time, I was a little bit younger than the guys on the team baseball wise, but they knew that I was interested in pursuing broadcasting as a career. And David was a comm major at Elon, and he's like, "Oh, you should come check it out." And I had heard some things about it. I have still to this day family in North Carolina, and so I had been coming to North Carolina from Virginia to visit, my entire life. So definitely liked the area. But then started to do a little bit more research, realized that the communication school was, in fact, a fantastic avenue for honing skills while also learning in a classroom environment. and so decided to take a tour, apply. But then what really set it apart at the end when it came down to make a decision was and I'm going to use an Elon buzz phrase here, but experiential learning. The ability to call women's basketball on WSOE, like realizing that the student radio station was the flagship station for women's basketball and broadcast baseball games, and that there was student TV opportunities, and just being able to hear about those opportunities by talking to current students, and being able to be a part of those chances to get better. And that just sold me, because I had been told by some folks I talked to about the industry, that the number one way to get better is through reps, and it's 100% true. And so I was like, okay, I like this campus. I like getting better. I like being able to be around sports, and so it just seemed like the perfect fit for me. And so I was able to enroll in the fall of 2012, and the rest is history, I guess you could say.
Do you remember your first game at Elon that you broadcasted?
Oh, 100%. Okay. So it was a men's soccer game against Duke. And so this is well before the era of Flow Sports, Elon Sports Vision, even Phoenix All Access. And these are just various names for the streaming platform. Back in the day, the majority of broadcasts were radio on WSOE. So WSOE would not just broadcast women's basketball, but would pick up, Olympic sports here and there. And we had a men's soccer broadcast against Duke on a Tuesday night. And to this day, Duke's men's soccer coaching staff, they schedule Elon every single year. It's a Tuesday game in October every year. And this year, it was in 2012, it was Elon's turn to host. Back then, there was no Rudd Field press box. The press facility at Rudd Field was the gazebo that I believe is still located somewhere on campus, somewhere near Mosley, maybe. But that gazebo used to be between the benches at Rudd Field, and that was the press area. Obviously, there's no room in there for broadcasters. And so then it's okay, where else do you broadcast from? Well, there's no power anywhere else at that facility other than up in the woods behind the goal. The I think it's the south goal that's
Mm-hmm.
near the road going over toward the lake. And so we broadcast the game on a table that we had set up in the woods, up in the corner, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 yards back from the playing surface, because there was a power outlet up there. And to make matters more interesting, uh, we were getting the very far fringes of Superstorm Sandy. Obviously, it hit the New York area much, much worse than North Carolina. But in North Carolina, it was very windy, and it was maybe 35 degrees in October outside, broadcasting this men's soccer game against Duke. It was a 0-0 draw. Late October 2012, first game I broadcast Elon. It's a memorable one for sure.
I will never take the Rudfield press box for advantage anymore.
There you go.
I gotta find the gazebo because I remember, for some context, you came and talked to the current ESV students, and you talked about that experience with the gazebo. I gotta figure out where it is.
It's somewhere. The former women's soccer head coach, Chris Neal, um, he joked at the time that it was going to be moved, and they were going to build a press area. He's like, yeah, we need to keep it on campus, have players come back and have their wedding in it.
That would be something.
Yeah, there you go.
I can say I have not seen a wedding on campus yet. Seen some engagement photos, seen some
Hmm.
engagements, but no weddings. As you moved through your Elon career, you became more and more involved, and that really started with basketball, football, these what a lot of people would call flagship sports. When did you start to get into those two? And that starts the conversation of TD and some of the higher ups in Elon Athletics. What were those relationships like as you were a student?
Yeah, good question. So I started to get involved with more of the flagship sports when Elon joined the CAA, which was July of 2014. So my junior year, 2014, 2015, was the first year in the CAA. And that meant a little more resources and a little more of an attention to video streaming, which it's kind of a chicken or egg thing, right? Like which came first, Elon joining the CAA or advances in video streaming? They were all kind of happening simultaneously in that era of college athletics. But that year in 2014, the athletic department started doing split broadcasts and taking a video feed that would not have the radio audio. And so myself and another student at the time, Justin Beagle, called the football games, the home football games that fall in 2014 on what was the predecessor for Elon Sports Vision, Flow Sports back in the time. Again, it was called Phoenix All Access. And then there was some of that with men's basketball as well, doing separate broadcasts from the radio audio. And eventually it's come around now that they are simulcasts again as things continue to progress through the industry. But at the time they were separate. So that was the first time I really got to touch football and men's basketball. I'd been doing women's basketball since my freshman year. I had split the schedule on WSOE my freshman sophomore year, but by junior year, I had taken on the entire slate of games. I was doing the whole thing, traveling every game home and away, and so that remained the priority at the time. But then another sport that you could consider a flagship, especially at the time, baseball. That was where I had my first on-air work with Taylor, and so uh, baseball had a deal at the time with the IMG network and with the flagship station WPCM in Burlington for 2025 regular season games, something along those lines. So most home games after basketball season ended, plus a handful of the midweek road games and postseason play as well. And those games had been done solo in 2014. So I approached Taylor and I said, "Hey, I'm interested in doing baseball with you in 2015." And I was fortunate enough that he agreed. So what we would do is he would do play-by-play innings 1 through 3 and 7 through 9. I would do color during that time. We'd flip-flop for the middle innings 4, 5, 6. And that year, got to do those conference home games, got to do road games against UNC and Wake Forest and ECU. And so all of a sudden, you're going to these pretty cool environments for college baseball. And so that was my first time working with Taylor was junior year. And that laid the foundation for my professional relationship with him that's continued on from there.
We talked about your first game. Do you have a favorite game or maybe favorite moment from your Elon career?
Okay, so I had a feeling this question was coming, and I've got a couple answers for you. So, from my time as a student, my sophomore year, when we played Clemson in the NCAA men's soccer first round, Clemson's one of the most successful programs in men's soccer historically. And in 2013, they had, by their standards, a touch of a down year. Still made the tournament, but were sent on the road to Elon for that first round, the round of 48. And it was a thrilling game. Came down to PKs. Elon advanced in PKs. Jason Waterman scored the winning goal in PKs. Ripped his shirt off, ran around the field, and I believe that Elon set the mark for highest attended first round game that year. Like it was a big deal that it was a NCAA tournament event on campus. I believe it was the first ever NCAA tournament event on campus in Elon's Division I history. And it was also the first time, again, I believe that a Elon team at the D1 level advanced in the postseason. Like baseball had made regionals and won a game or two in a regional, but had not advanced out of the regional. So it was the first time that an Elon team advanced to the next round of the NCAA tournament. Such a cool moment, such a special night for the men's soccer program and the athletic department as a whole. Kind of jumping ahead here and not to spoil anything we might talk about later with my journey, but I did football games with Taylor after graduation. And the number one memory that sticks out there was fall of 2018. Elon went to James Madison to play football, and JMU was in the midst of a massive run of success at the FCS level. Springboarded them eventually to their current spot in the Sun Belt at the FBS level. But JMU was rolling people, and this was Elon's second year under Kurt Cignetti. Talk about springboards. And program had gone to the postseason in 2017 and had gotten off to a pretty solid start in 2018. Lost to South Florida on the road, but then reeled off a dominating win against Furman, a dominating comeback win against Charleston Southern game where the final score made it seem much more lopsided than it actually was in the first half, and then had beaten New Hampshire at home pretty good. And so you had a feeling that things were kind of rolling. For football, but JMU was, speaking of rolling, they were on one at the time. They had taken NC State to the wire in week 1 and then just crushed people ever since then. Like, they'd been at Richmond the game before playing Elon at home, and again, something like 56-10, like a really, really lopsided game against a really good program in Richmond. And so on paper, it seemed like, okay, this is a top 10 game between an Elon team at the back end of the top 10. JMU was number 2, only behind North Dakota State. Like, there's no way in which this is going to be close, is what outsiders thought. I had a feeling it was going to be close. Could Elon pull it off? I don't know. Like, we'll see. Like, it's very hard to go to JMU and win. And spoiler alert, they did. JMU got up 9-0, and that's part of the reason why Elon was able to win is JMU, whenever they would make any sort of long drive, it would stall out more often than not. So they kicked a bunch of field goals. There was a successful onside kick in the second quarter that allowed Elon to steal a possession and take a 10-9 lead at one point. And just a really, really well played, well coached game. And the Phoenix did just enough to earn a win against JMU, and that's one of those moments where it had such a butterfly effect moving forward. It's what I think eventually led to Coach Cignetti's success that he's now had. I mean, now he's a Big Ten head coach, and it kept Elon relevant in the football landscape, and what Coach Trish has done in the time ever since, and keeping Elon as a team that's a contender in the CAA. And I think that that current status of the program really dates back to that day in 2018.
I started not too long after that, and that moment is still one that people talk about, I think, all these years later.
Mm-hmm.
And you alluded to it. You stuck around with Elon in terms of broadcasting after graduation. How did that opportunity come up? Or was it a seamless flow from one stage to the next? And how'd you navigate that post-grad world? Because you mentioned early on, broadcasting it's a tougher industry, I think, to break into when you're first starting out. How do you start to navigate post-grad, and how did Elon stay in the fold?
Yeah, it definitely was not a seamless flow where it went straight from, okay, I get my diploma to I'm not going to leave. And like you alluded to, Chase, there is no one path in the broadcasting world, right? And so more often than not, these jobs are not ones where you go on LinkedIn and see an application and fill something out, and all of a sudden, boom, you've got your full-time job. That's just not the way that this industry works. And if anything, it's moving further away from that. So I mentioned my relationship with Taylor. He had got me in with the people over at what was then the IMG headquarters. It's now the Learfield Eastern headquarters in Winston-Salem, where the radio broadcasts of a large majority of major college programs are produced and studio hosted. So if you listen to any sort of major conference game and they say, let's go to the Learfield Network Studios, again, at the time, the IMG Network Studios, and someone comes on and gives a score update, it's probably coming from Winston-Salem. And it just so happens that's an hour away from Elon. And so I started working over there as a studio host and producer for Marshall's football and men's basketball games when I was still a student at Elon. I had one semester to go because I graduated early in December of 2015. So I finished off my senior year, if you will, commuting over to Winston, doing those games, and was still over there in Winston. I had transitioned to the University of Pittsburgh for the 16-17 athletic year. And I got a call from Elon saying, "Hey, we want to just make sure that the men's basketball video stream is a quality product, and we want to continue to give students opportunities as analysts and behind the scenes. Can you do play-by-play for a men's basketball video stream?" And I worked it out with IMG. I would miss a handful of pit games that year, and it worked out that I was able to call the Elon games on the video stream in that 16-17 year. Then in the spring of 17, gentleman by the name of David Hibbard, who had worked on the football radio broadcast for a while, stepped aside. That moved Taylor over into the play-by-play chair from the analyst chair, left the analyst chair open. And while, like I mentioned, I didn't even play football in high school or anything like that, so I am far from qualified to be a X's and O's junkie football analyst. But because so much of that role also entailed hosting the pregame and postgame show and halftime coverage and being able to go down and interview the coach prior to halftime, there's so many other roles involved. And so I'm thankful that Taylor thought that I would be a good fit. So I had to work it out with the folks over at IMG that I would no longer be doing football over there and would be back in a football broadcast booth and traveling with the team for the first time. So that was 2017 that I got involved with doing that, and did that for 5 seasons, 17, 18, 19, through the 21 campaign, the fall 21 campaign. So that was a really cool opportunity. And like I talked about the JMU story, got to be a part of some pretty cool moments as well.
Eventually, your experiences at Elon with Learfield, that leads you to UNC where you are now. And you're not just the radio voice of the women's basketball team. You do a couple different things, but when did that opportunity start with the Tar Heels? It's a huge historical program, as I'm sure you'll talk about. How did that opportunity come up? And just for the people that don't know, explain all your different roles that you have over at Chapel Hill.
Yeah, I'll start with the history of the role first. And it truly comes down to networking and people and people that I met at Elon. The two biggest names are Taylor, who we've talked about, and Charlotte Smith. Um, Essentially, I had sent a copy of a radio basketball play-by-play clip that I had made because I was filling in for Taylor on a men's basketball game. There was a tournament that Elon played in at UW Milwaukee the weekend prior to Thanksgiving in 2017. And long story short, Taylor got to fill in for me on football. So he stayed behind with football, and I traveled with basketball to Milwaukee. And so I had this, radio clip. And so I wanted to get some critique on it. And that's pretty commonplace in this industry, to be able to reach out to people and say, "Hey, can you just take a listen when you get the chance?" One of the people that I had reached out to was Jones Angel, who is the radio play-by-play voice of Carolina football, men's basketball on the Tar Heel Sports Network. He succeeded Taylor's father, Woody, in that role. There have only been two men to hold that job since, for over 45 years now. Jones has been in there since 2011. Woody held it for many decades prior to that. And so I had sent this critique to Jones. He liked my work. I had no idea at the time that the Tar Heel Sports Network was going to, or was in the position where they may have an opening for women's basketball play-by-play. The gentleman who did it before me, a guy named Walter Storholt, made a little bit of a career change. He's still in the media and podcast world, but wanted to get away from play-by-play on a regular basis. And so there was an opening, and it and filtered back, I think, through Jones to Taylor that there was an opening. And Taylor was the one who actually first mentioned it to me, like, "Hey, would you be interested in this?" Absolutely. And so then I had Coach Smith make a call. At the time, Coach Smith's college head coach, Sylvia Hatchell, was the head coach over there. And so Coach Smith made a call on my behalf. I was fortunate enough to be hired there in 2018 and have been in that women's basketball role ever since. It's been a wild ride. We had a coaching change after my first year, and then we had COVID after my second year. My fourth year, we made the Sweet 16 in 2022. We're the only team to play eventual national champ South Carolina to within single digits in their entire tournament run that year, lost by 8. In the Sweet 16. That's one of those games where it's like, one or two plays here and there. You never know what could have been. And the Elite Eight matchup would have been, I believe, against Creighton, who had upset Iowa State. So it was a winnable Elite Eight game, but whatever. And then, we've just continued to be a part of this boom of women's basketball. And so it's a really cool time to be involved with the sport and should have a fun 24-25 season coming up. But as you alluded to, I do more than just women's basketball radio. I was fortunate enough to get to Carolina 1 year before the launch of the linear ACC network. And so much like being at Elon, when video streaming was first becoming a thing, video streaming was getting a massive upgrade at Carolina with the resources that ESPN provides for ACC network. And so I was able to get involved slowly at first, but build up roles on ACC Network Extra, which is the digital arm of ACC Network that shows literally every single home event that we have across every single sport that, you line up two teams and play. So there's 11 teams that are team sports, if you will. And then we also cover wrestling and gymnastics. So it's 13 sports in total. But ACC Network Extra shows every single home event. So I was able to get play-by-play roles there. And then when COVID hit, ESPN kind of restructured the way in which they handle game production. Not to get too in the weeds, but every single ACC, SEC, and Big 12 school has a control room, much like the one that Elon has, that is fiber connected to ESPN headquarters in Bristol. And so ESPN kind of changed the way in which they produced games and how all that back end worked in and around the pandemic. And so all of a sudden, schools were producing more games than ever. And I'm thankful that the coordinating producer for ACC Network at Carolina, Lauren George is her name. And Lauren asked me at just kind of a routine end of year meeting, would you be interested in producing linear games? She said, I think it would only help you as a play-by-play person. And so I said yes. It was a way to continue to grow my portfolio at Carolina, be able to make more connections in the industry and learn a important skill that makes me one of the few, I'm not the only one, but one of the few across the country that does play-by-play and production. And it's opened a lot of cool doors. And I'm fortunate that I kind of have these, 3 roles: the radio play-by-play on the women's basketball front, the TV play-by-play on ACC Network Extra, and then the producing role all at one place at Carolina. It's pretty cool.
Well, to break it down, just this past year, over 120 events across 13 different sports. And I think it's a little bit underrated in terms of being able to call 13 different sports and to know them well enough to call them. Apart from basketball, do you have a favorite sport across those 13 that you've been able to call?
So the cop-out answer that I always give is whatever's in season. But if I had to pick some favorites, I always love calling baseball. I spent 4 years as the radio voice of the then Burlington Royals, now Sock Puppets, but back when Burlington was a affiliated minor league team. And so I do miss being around baseball on a more regular basis. But being able to call AC Network Extra baseball is really cool. That's always special. I have taken a massive, massive liking to field hockey. That is something that my high school just started a program my senior year, and then Elon does not have the sport, so I was very unfamiliar with it when I got to Carolina. But obviously, the Tar Heels are a dynasty, and winning 5 of the last 6 national titles, and just continuing to grow the sport from a publicity standpoint with Aaron Matson's transition from player to coach. The attention on the sport has never been greater. And so being able to kind of be a part of that and learn that sport, and that has not been easy. There have been mistakes that I made on the air with that. But being able to be a part of that has been really, really cool. Really liked field hockey. I know you're a big lacrosse guy, Chase. I really enjoy calling lacrosse come springtime, both men's and women's. Those games are a lot of fun too.
Moving back to women's basketball specifically, there has been not only in women's basketball, women's sports in general, field hockey, women's lacrosse has gotten a huge boost. There has been this complete astronomical growth in women's athletics, especially in basketball. You talk about Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, these huge names now. To be kind of on the sideline for that throughout its process, through the pandemic till after to this past year, what has that been like, and what have you seen from your unique perspective?
Yeah, I'd say it's very rewarding. And I think if I had to sum up what's occurred, I think that in this post pandemic world, especially, the one sacred thing in television and media among live programming is live sports. Like people can watch movies and binge shows all they want, and streaming platforms are very successful in that regard. But the thing that keeps live TV around is live sports. And more than that, people tune in for big games. And I think that the media world is realizing that when you properly market very, very marketable and interesting personalities and play up the big game factor, people tune in droves. It's happened with women's basketball. It's happened with softball and volleyball are booming as far as TV products on ESPN. Women's gymnastics is having an increased moment. I think it'll only get bigger in a post-Olympics world, like in this upcoming academic year. And we talked about how Carolina's in a unique spot with the field hockey aspect of things. But it is just really cool and really rewarding to see just how much the general public has taken to women's sports. And thankfully, while there's still a long way to go, ESPN and from a pro standpoint, the CBSs and the Foxes of the world are putting resources into these sports and starting to see results in a viewership standpoint. So fun to see it grow, fun to see it continue to grow because at its core, college sports are something that brings people together, and people are realizing that the colleges that they root for in football and men's basketball forever, seeing these big games in other sports and realizing some of the personalities involved, it makes it just as rewarding to be a fan in some of those other sports, and it's really cool.
Getting into more of the nuance of broadcasting, we've talked about it a little bit throughout, but I think there's certain elements that kind of go under the radar. One of those that's been mentioned throughout is relationship building. In my opinion, one of the largest challenges for any media member is bridging that gap between media and athletes. What has your experience been like in conversations with coaches, with athletes, and how have you been able to build relationships throughout your career?
It's a really good question. I think the baseline advice I would give to anyone starting out in the broadcast world is make sure that you are a friendly person, but you are not their friend, if you know what I'm saying. That is not to create any sort of animosity, but in fact, it's the exact opposite. Like I said, be friendly, but don't be a friend. Like you have to understand that there is a line between yourself and the players and coaches, whether that's being respectful of their time, being respectful of their space, being respectful of their emotions off of a, hard fought game, win or lose, or the stress that goes into just being an athlete or a coach in a social media dominated world day to day. And so if you can build the trust with those players and coaches that you are never, especially from my standpoint as someone that is embedded with the team, from a women's basketball standpoint, I'm not out to get them. I am out to make them look good as much as humanly possible. And that is my goal and that is my job. And so being able to have them understand that and then have us work together to, foster those that growth and that exposure for themselves in the program is my mission. And being able to learn about how to properly build those relationships with players and coaches is something that goes back to my time doing women's basketball on WSOE at Elon. And it's different when you are a student and you look at the coaching staff then as more, okay, those are the adults in the room. And then you have classes sometimes with the players. That's the cool thing about Elon is that it's small enough that you get to build those relationships as, student peers. But then nowadays, as an adult at Carolina, I'm more on the same plane of life, if you will, with the coaching staff and other support staff folks than the players. But still, I would consider my relationships with the players as all, like I said, friendly, but not friends, and very, very professional. And it's worked out way more often than not that I have really good relationships with everybody that I work with.
That's one piece of advice. Do you have any other tips and tricks that you don't want to give away everything, but do you have any advice that you would give to someone that is thinking about getting into broadcasting or has started and still trying to grow?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. Number one, understand that it can be a sometimes random process. I was fortunate enough to get some opportunities at a young age, both in the minor league baseball fronts at Carolina. I got that job when I was 24 years old. I was doing Elon football at whatever, 22, 23. But yet, now I'm approaching 30 and I'm still, you could say I'm still in these roles, but yet they've grown and developed enough that every day is a new challenge. Um, and so success does not follow any sort of linear path. Everyone has their own path throughout this industry. There's no one way to get from point A to point B. And so it is an industry that, while sometimes randomly, does reward hard work. The hours are long, the hours are weird. And, sometimes people ask me, oh, what's your take on XYZ NFL topic, for example? I enjoy watching the NFL when I can, but, oftentimes Sundays in the fall and into the winter, I'm calling field hockey or volleyball or producing a women's soccer game. And then come November, basketball starts up. And so if you're going to climb the ladder through college sports or minor league baseball or what have it, whatever you are covering is the most important thing in sports in your world in that time. And just always remember that you may end up being able to call some sort of really big game or some pro team down the line. But just giving your all to what you're focused on in that given moment will make it a much more rewarding experience, a much more genuine experience, and will make it a more fruitful journey for somebody that is getting into this business.
100%. I couldn't agree more. As I've mentioned it a couple of times as a lacrosse guy, especially we talked about it earlier with the flagship sports like football, men's basketball. The other sports are kind of seen as the stepping stones to those, but those sports also deserve their elite coverage. And it goes back to putting voices on women's basketball and these other sports. It's not just, oh, these are your B tier broadcasters that aren't doing men's basketball. No, these are your S tier women's broadcasters that know the game inside out and can provide the coverage that you expect from a top tier broadcast. A little bit more of a fun question, because this is also something with broadcasters. Do you have a favorite catchphrase or a broadcaster that is your favorite?
Ooh, that's a good one there. So among broadcasters that are my favorite, obviously I judge it on a twofold how are they on the air in terms of their style and fundamentals and everything that they bring to the table, and then kind of what kind of person are they. And so if I had to name favorites, two of the very best going today are Ian Eagle and Kevin Harlan from CBS and Turner. They are tremendous on the air, and they are even better people off of the air. So among people that the general public sports fan knows, they are some of my favorites to listen to on any sort of time where I have to just watch or listen to a game. Up and comers in the business. Was fortunate enough to produce our baseball regional this June, and Mike Monaco had the play-by-play call there. He is someone that is going to continue to get even bigger assignments in years to come as someone who's an up-and-comer now at ESPN. Ian's son, Noah Eagle, is fantastic among a young voice in our industry, and just like Ian is hilarious and a great person off of the air. So those are some of my favorites that I try and emulate as much as possible without, being a copycat of something that I'm not, that someone else's brand is on the air. Catchphrases, I'm not a huge catchphrase guy. Like, again, I'm not someone that's going to build off of shtick. But there are certain things that I end up saying a decent amount over the course of, a women's basketball game or something. Like I'll use eyes and flies on a free throw or something along those lines, or the official name steps in between the duo, elevates the basketball with his right hand, and the tap is won by Carolina. They'll work it left. Like every game ends up starting out kind of the same way. So it's more so that there's certain verbal patterns that all mix in with regularity on a game than a so-called catchphrase.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you for your time today and sitting down talking with us. As you look towards the future of not only your own career, but also just broadcasting in general, it feels like we're it's really this transition period where these other sports are getting finally their due, but also in the world of broadcasters and analysts, there is definitely a transition. I feel like with a lot of these athletes are starting now to become analysts. Some of the biggest contracts in the world for TV are now Stephen A. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you saw 25 million a year. Tom Brady is, I think, Fox's highest paid broadcaster. So there's definitely a transition period happening. From your perspective, what do you see in terms of the future of broadcasting? I don't think, not to say that play by play or anything is going away anytime soon, but what do you see for the future of broadcasting and yourself?
No, I would agree. I think that the concept of a sports TV or sports, I'll call it audio broadcast, because very few people are listening on a traditional terrestrial AM FM radio anymore, but yet, streaming audio is still big. Those things are not going away. Like you said, there is an emphasis on the entertainment factor at the highest levels of broadcasting, where getting big names in there, a Tom Brady, a Tony Romo, etc., is commanding the business side of broadcasting. For more of a, in the weeds answer, there are more opportunities than ever with streaming video at various schools across the country. With the boom of women's sports and the coverage of those professional leagues, there's more chances than there ever have been before to get on the air. But that also means that it's going to be more competitive than ever before. So I think the biggest key is just to continue for everyone, myself down to you and anybody else that might be listening that has an interest in getting into this business, creating your own brand, your own niche, and figuring out just kind of what makes you happy in this business, and then continue to climb the ladder if those opportunities are going to come your way. But don't shy away from being yourself along the way.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on, Matt. Thank you so much for sitting down for an episode of the Rising Phoenix podcast. I truly appreciate it.
Chase, thanks so much for having me on. Always good to chat broadcasting, share some memories from my time at Elon, and looking forward to continuing to follow everything that you guys are doing over there.
Thank you, Matt, for joining me on this episode of the podcast. You can listen to Matt on the Tar Heel Sports Network during the UNC-Chapel Hill women's basketball team season. If you have not already, make sure to subscribe, follow, like, and share wherever you get your podcast. We truly appreciate all the support, and we now have over a dozen episodes available, so there's plenty of content for you to enjoy. If you are an Elon athlete, coach, or alumni interested in being featured in a future episode of the podcast, contact Chase Strasser at cstrasser@elon.edu. That's CSTRAWSER@elon.edu. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media channels. That's on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcast, but also at Elon Rising Phoenix on Instagram and TikTok, and at EU Rising Phoenix on X/Twitter. New articles, graphics, and more can be found on all these platforms daily. Finally, new episodes of the podcast are coming out all the time, so check back in every few weeks for a brand new episode with an exciting new guest. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Rising Phoenix podcast.